Hi, everybody, and well, blimey, what a day to be here. It is season two, episode 28, I think, of Guest Safety Officer uh, Lobby Group. And what we're here to discuss this morning is the budget, uh, which was yesterday for Mike and us, actually. Yes. And the reason I say for Mike as well, because Mike Kill is in Australia, very international flavour, and coming in from en français is Alistair Turnham. And I'm going to ask them both to just basically say what they do, because I think it's important that we all understand what they're representing today. And also to ask the first question that I will want them to sort of just touch on is, do they know what a chequebook is? Because I've got no idea. The Prime Minister mentioned this. I definitely don't know what one is. I haven't had one for years. So, first and foremost, Mr. Kill.
Well, I've been on here so many times, and you have told me that you've made my career over a period of time here. So I have to thank you for the opportunity, as I always do each time. But I'm the chief executive of a trade organisation called the Nighttime Industries Association. I'm currently in Sydney, Australia, at the Neon Conference, which is a nighttime economy conference, sort of supported by New South Wales government, but I also double up as the vice president of the International Nightlife Association, which is a more global sort of perspective. So that's me, and I'm somewhere at the other end of the earth, at the other end of the timescale.
Ali?
Hi, Ian. Hi, Mike. I'm Alistair Turnham. I'm the founder of Make Associates. At Make, we do nighttime economy strategies. And we have worked in Sydney, where Mike is at the moment. In fact, that was the first time anyone measured the evening and nighttime economy, which was a study that we did back in 2010-11, say the value of it. We now do the annual nighttime economy study for Mike at the NTIA. My background is in planning and economic regeneration, and I do know what a chequebook is. I used to live in the building which NatWest processed all the checks in Britain for, and there's a picture of it hanging in the hall of that building. It's in Bermondsey in London. And there were just people sat at desks processing checks, millions of checks every day, and from the 1950s to 1995. So there you go. That's what I know about checks.
Okay, well, that's fantastic. Look, guys, it was obviously we'll come on. It was a very interesting budget. First question is, do you think that it was a good budget for the nighttime economy or a bad one? Mike, let's go to you first.
I mean, to be quite frank about it, it was a bad one for the nighttime economy, given the current inflationary position for many businesses. I don't think anyone's hidden the fact, whether you talk about festivals, events, clubs, bars, pubs, restaurants, everyone are in a very fragile position in terms of their economic sort of or their sort of financial position. So we were hoping that the budget, and I think, to be honest with you, the rhetoric leading up to the budget suggested quite clearly towards what we were going to get. I think the benchmark was what did business rates relief look like, or were we going to get it? We without a doubt had some quite robust conversations with Treasury representatives leading up to it. We were asked if the extension wasn't clear, what other options would we like, or what would we want to consider? We did talk about a tapering and aligning it with the inflation sort of kicking in to a higher degree. And it looks like they have picked up some of that, the 40% over the 2 years. If I'm going to be quite honest, I would have liked them to do it slightly differently, and it was definitely not what we'd suggested moving forward. But given the fact that they would have either withdrawn it or tapered it to a point, we've got what we've got. What has really kicked us in the teeth is things like the national insurance employers contribution, the thresholds, the alcohol duty, which was presented as a 1p saving on pints, but when you look at RPI and the remainder of alcohol, it would look like we're going to see an increase overall anyway. Obviously, not the controversial national living wage. And I think the frustrating part about this is we do want to pay our staff well. We do want to, pay them enough so that they can live in a very, very challenging environment. But it's a very fragile ecosystem that we are part of. And if the businesses can't afford to pay the staff, it could work the opposite way. It could be counterproductive. There could be a streamlining of shifts. There could be a removal of shifts. We're already talking to people who are talking in that context. So, is it the right move to push national living wage further? From my perspective, I want to pay people the right amount of money for their job. I don't want to differentiate between age. I understand all of that, but it has to be a balance, and the balance between what's going on in terms of workforce and what we pay them and what the businesses can afford is a precarious and challenging piece. Have they got it right? We'll soon find out. I mean, most of the people are talking to me about a 90,000 to 150,000 per year increase in operating costs with as an estimation off the back of those tax positions. Definitely micro businesses will benefit, and I was on Times Radio this morning suggesting that will absolutely be the case. But all of these things are scalable. There are thresholds. 110k in terms of business rates still in place. We talk about long-term reform, planning, business rates, etc. But many of those businesses won't possibly see the benefit of that reform long term. And I understand that the business rates position is more of a bridging mechanism, but I still think we're in quite a fragile position off the back of this, and there's a lot of frustration across the industry at present. But also, given the fact that we're still trying to work out exactly some of the nuances against categories, so there's still a lot of intricate pieces, and also the detail is still being sifted through. Sorry.
Well, Ali, I was expecting a yes or a no answer to that question when we started.
Down under. I've just been talking at a conference clearly for 2 days.
It's gonna, Ali, how was it? How was the budget for you? And obviously, there's a lot to pick up there with what Mike said.
Yeah, I think, but a budget is never, well, it's just degrees of good or bad, even if it is good or bad, right? And the devil is always in the detail. And you always have 2 days after a budget, don't you, where people really pick over what was in it and realize what it really means, because no one can really make all of those mental calculations while Chancellor is giving it out in the House of Commons, right? It's not possible. I suppose for me, I'm perhaps look at it slightly different, because obviously Mike and his members are at the cutting edge of the nighttime economy. I'm perhaps a bit more interested in, well, obviously I'm interested in them, because without them, what is our nighttime economy? But I suppose I'm interested in what are the conditions that surround that in terms of, say, local authorities managing and supporting the places in which businesses and people come together in the night. And there wasn't really a lot in it for local authorities, and I don't suppose we expected it to be, all about raising funds, particularly for the health service. That was its primary function for investment in that, trying to raise that £40 billion for some of the shortfalls in other public services as well, social care. So in terms of, I'm sort of thinking about, well, whether it's the operators, Mike's side, or the customer, where's the customer's money coming from to go out in the evening and nighttime economy. And there's some small changes in there, But there's nothing really apart from, in terms of slight rise in the minimum wage, which Mike's touched on, which then will be circulated back into the pockets of those younger people who work in the industry who are going out again at night. There might be some kind of knock-on benefit from that, because they're the main consumers of our evening and nighttime economy. I was hoping for stuff, for local authorities in terms of, yes, okay, so they retain 50% of business rates. So business rates going up means they may receive more money to invest locally. Would they be invested in things that the evening and nighttime economy benefits from, such as, improvements to the town and city centres that where it takes place, the public realm, in terms of safety initiatives? No, because it all goes into the bigger pot, right? She announced £500 million for potholes, right? And while filling potholes in wins votes, right, of all parties, it's not going to really help the evening and nighttime economy, apart from maybe somebody cycling home from working in one of Mike's venues not falling off their bike by hitting a pothole. So there wasn't really much in that. There wasn't much around transport in terms of supporting evening and nighttime transport. I didn't think there was an awful lot around supporting housing. There was a bit on affordable housing. One of the things we need to do, although it's a double-edged sword, is get more people living in our towns and city centres so that they are the people using our evening and nighttime economies. Many of our town and city centres have been hollowed out over the years. And getting urban living back in has been one of our great success stories, although it does threaten evening and nighttime venues when you get a resident complaining about moving into an area that's had nightlife for the last 50 years. That's a separate debate we can go into, but it really wasn't much on that on housing and urban regeneration either. So I didn't feel it was a particularly great budget, but you accept that the government has other priorities than things like supporting us and one of our most important industries. And as you know, I did the study for Mike with my colleague Ash from CGA, which said that our industry is worth the year before last, £136 billion to the UK economy. So I don't feel that the evening and nighttime economy has had a particularly good deal in terms of how it's supported, rather than the kind of front end of running a business in it. There you go. Not great, but not terrible either.
Not great. I just want to pick up on that, Mike, and a very sort of. So we've got that last bit that you were saying. We've got an industry that's worth 100, and what was it? 100 and how many?
136
billion pounds, employing how many people? It's
2.08 million people.
Yeah. So, but if we were and I'm just going to say, if we were a union, which obviously we're not, if we were organised in that kind of way, then would we not have had a greater voice? Do you think that might have enabled us to get a better deal from both the town planning side of things, Ali, and obviously from the actual trade association perspective, Mike?
I'm going to be really honest with you. I think this is the first budget for one. The second one is the first and last opportunity they will have to blame everything on the previous regime, which I think we all know and we've heard, and it's very, very clear: blame, blame, blame. So this is the first and last opportunity, and only golden ticket they will be given up until the spring budget, where they will have a limited ability to respond in that way. So they will take every opportunity to present the bad news in a way that is about creating foundations. I think it could have gone a lot further, and in some respects, the rhetoric that was coming out was hugely worrying, particularly around the sort of last minute battling in 2 and 8 between the Treasury and ourselves and others about business rates. And I don't think people will probably understand how fraught those last minute negotiations were, in terms of getting any support over the line. So if you can imagine, if they'd withdrawn it and it was a cliff edge, we'd have been in a very, very difficult or different position. I think the challenge, as you always have with all of these, is we've got to deal with what's in front of us now. There's a lot of people doing their sums, reorganizing their financial forecasting, and we're going to have to live through this and see where we go once we get to the spring budget, which we hope will present a very different position. But I think at the moment everyone is just head down working through the figures and going, how does this affect me? The other thing, just to bring in, and probably the bigger concern is what the likes of Wales and Scotland and devolved governments are going to do. Because at the moment, while we talk about the 40%, Scotland in particular has nothing in terms of business rates relief. And we've presented quite a strong case to Kate Forbes about the Barnett consequentials being passed over, and similarly in Wales on a similar plane. So for us, our next focus is things like the December budget for Scotland, which will be driven along the lines of that relief being passed over, given the extremely challenging environment that Scotland is faced with at the moment.
Ollie?
I suppose my thoughts are less about the budget particularly, and more about Labour's announcements, such as they've been on generally supporting economic growth, right? So, they understand that, if you want to grow your tax receipts so you can improve the investment in public services, then you're going to have to grow the cake as well as what you take out of the cake. And there's only so much you can take out of the cake, regardless of your political persuasion. And I suppose, the rhetoric around that has been good, in terms of supporting economic growth, trying to take the shackles off. I mean, as always, every government likes to say they will do it. And the question is, well, why haven't they done it in the previous ones, if it's so easy to unshackle the potential of UK PLC or England PLC in the case of some of these measures? I suppose for me, while the rhetoric is good, we need to see some firm policies, in subsequent King speeches, and I would like to see more business-friendly licensing regimes. And Mike would agree on that, in terms of some of the restrictions within current licensing act, things like that. It's unlikely that would be in the spring budget. It's much more of a policy approach. And in terms of planning, things such as we have agent of change, which is the principle, for those who don't know, that protects uses in our concern in towns and city centres from people coming in. Usually it's about noise complaints from new residents for a nightclub or a live music venue that's been there for 20 years. And at the moment, agent of change as a principle is a nice idea, but the actual legislative background for it is not fit for purpose. So I'd like to see that changed so that is much clearer, and we can protect our nighttime economy venues much better. I'd like to see some things in licensing, such as a full and frank debate around the value of things such as cumulative impact policies, late night levy, etc. What benefit do they bring, if they bring any? What are the disbenefits of them as well, in terms of holding back investment? So some things aren't simply about the budget; they're about wider policy initiatives, and trying to understand the things that are in place that are frustrating investment in the evening and nighttime economy. As Mike's rightly set out, people aren't investing in the evening and nighttime economy because they're going to make a load of money. Generally, they're investing in there because they're passionate about it, because it's the heart of our artistic and cultural creativity in the UK. It's the thing that makes places worth living in or visiting. You wouldn't say that about going to the bank, would you? It's a function, right? What we need is a nighttime economy that's super exciting, and we need people investing in new concepts for that. And I don't see anything in the budget or particularly in a lot of the wider policy discussions at the moment, that's really going to help that and help Mike's members?
Well, I mean, the interesting part is, I mean, without getting into the capital gains tax side, I mean, they have seen the 66, I think it was 62 or 66 billion pounds worth of investment coming into the UK off the back of their investment meetings that they had, I think, a couple of weeks back. The more interesting position is what the growth strategy and the industrial strategy is going to look like. Now, we have been asked on several plays, just to pick up the point, is one, to present some information to Gareth Thomas, a small medium enterprise business minister or hospitality minister, on what we would like to see in support of SMEs in terms of policy, which is going to be quite an interesting piece of work. And we're also speaking to MHCLG around the low-hanging fruit on agent of change and also the planning reform side. So those pieces are starting to move forward, very slow, as you can imagine. Everyone's sort of working around what happened with the budget, and I'm sure it will pick up pace. We've got meetings over the next couple of weeks with regard to it. So it's going to be an interesting sort of pre-Christmas sort of proposition, understanding which direction they're going to go. But yeah, like you say, I mean, I think there are, and I think this is a challenge, and you quite rightly put it. There are a lot of positive noises, but the transactional position that's being presented, I wouldn't say is contradictory, but it definitely isn't supportive of the narrative as clearly. And that's the bit that I think kind of feels slightly disingenuous from an industry perspective.
Yeah, the thing that strikes me here is that we always must worry about it, whatever a government or anybody says generally, is the decision gap. I'd like to do X, but do I actually then go on and do it? Does it actually translate into real term results or outcomes? So bearing that in mind, and I just want to just come back and sort of touch back on the NIC. For the national insurance contributions for employers. I think we were all expecting the older age gap to happen. I was quite interested, the 18 to 20-year-olds, that was a significant, that went up to 16%, I believe. So given that 18 to 20-year-old is predominantly where the majority of people within the nighttime, employees within the nighttime economy come from, what kind of impact do you see that having, Mike?
I think it's quite obvious where we're going to see that impact and that concern. The challenge that we've got is, it's very clear that we're one of the leading sort of employers of under 30s. The challenge you have is like you say, you talk about national living wage in a way from a business perspective, then you are always challenged on, do you not think it's right for people to be paid the right amount of money given the inflationary position? No different than nurses, doctors, and all the conversations we've had around public services. So the reality is absolutely, I would want to, any case, whether I'm a business owner or a trade organisation, I'd want the workforce to feel valued and paid relevant so that they can work within our environments and feel, paid appropriately against inflation. The challenge you have is if you have businesses that are struggling because of impacts on inflation, off of inflation in terms of the cost of operating, then that presents another challenge because you've got employees who are able to access that funding, and you've got a lot of business owners who are not paying themselves because they can't afford to pay themselves. We talk about 30 to 40% increase in operating costs. What does that mean now, given some of the other implications on those additional taxes? What is going to be the impact is the next question. Is it going to be counterproductive? Is it going to work for us? Is it going to, are we going to be able to grow from this? So there are lots of questions, and that also then feeds into policy decisions. What's going to happen with planning? How are we going to look at investment? Is licensing going to change? Are we going to start to remove some of these barriers so that we can actually trade? So there are lots of other questions, and quite rightly that Ali has brought them up. But the reality is, in the cold light of day, we're going to be worse off. Do our staff need to be paid better? Yeah, particularly the younger ones. I mean, we want them to stay in. One of the challenges that we've got at the moment is people see the industry as a stepping stone, not as a career. And part of moving towards that environment is, presenting a formidable wage that is going to make them feel like they're being nourished in some respects. Some of the questions around things like security resource, national living wage, is going to impact on that as well if we transition to PAYE. So there are lots of things that need to be considered. That is definitely something that HMRC and others are very aware of. It's definitely something that is a consideration around where the security sector is going, which will be welcomed by many, I'm sure. But like you say, we've got to understand the financial impact on a sector which is without a doubt been through the mill. So that's what we're sort of working through at the moment, is those financial models and whether they're sustainable.
Ali, just to going on what Mike said as well, is how important in these kind of things then is the foundations for town planning, and for getting these things right. I mean, the Town Planning Act? There's not been a great deal. There's been, again, we're talking about we're going to repeal A, B, and C and D so we can create the opportunities for growth. Will this help with the previous question, what Mike said? How does that all wrap in? And it's
not sure it does, Ian. Okay, so I'll give you some. I was thinking what Mike was saying there. So if you look at employer contributions in France, you said in the introduction, I spent some of my time in France, some of my time in London and the UK. Employer contributions are 45%, give or take, depending on the size of business where you are in France. So it's a lot more than the rise in national insurance and the maybe 3% in pensions, depending on your employees. So it is all relative. So, but the thing I was going to say about that is you might have a 1.2% rise in NIC, right? But John Collins, who we know is the chief executive of Live, representing the UK's live music sector, he was particularly pleased this year that I think about that sector, the grassroots music venue sector, is now posting profit of 0.5%, or give or take, as a collective. And obviously that means there's some really, really good grassroots live music venues that are operating in there, because most are still making some kind of a loss, right? And I suppose this is maybe a question for Mike, really, and it's less about town planning. Ian, I can talk about that, but it's how do we make small nightlife venues that have a cultural program, or grassroots music venues, how do we create better conditions for them in which to trade? Because the business model is not really sustainable for them unless they have Arts Council funding, national portfolio status, right, and they're getting that central grant. I suppose the question is, well, how can you make them special and give them special dispensation because of the cultural value that they're adding to our existence in the UK?
I think,
and that's a question for you, Mike, really.
I think one of the challenges that we have is we haven't experienced financial stability for 5 years now.
Yeah.
Plus, we've been closed, we've been open, we've been able to put things on. The operating costs have gone through the roof. We've gone through a series of taxation increases. National living wage went up prior to the autumn or spring budget with the Conservatives in control. A couple of days before, similar sort of metric that has happened this time around. People have still got debt, so they're trying to catch up with. So being quite honest with you, we need to sort of get to a point of financial stability. The other thing that I think is really important to recognise, and you really hit the nail on the head with this, is the reality is there are some things within the inflationary sphere that are not going to change. not going to come down to the point that everyone would like them to come down. Energy being one of them, rent and leasing. We're not going to see those come down for some period of time. So let's not create a false economy where we're all sat around the table suggesting that they're going to come down and things are going to change and go back to normal. That's not the case. We then have to question is whether the financial models for these businesses and other categories are really fit for purpose now. And whether there has to be a broader consideration around different sort of financial modelling for a club, bar, pub, restaurant, etc., that have got to be considered. And how do we get to a point where we can refine those operations to give ourselves some financial, that financial stability is going to be a really important piece, and understanding what that stable model looks like so that we can, then start to concentrate on what we're doing in terms of product positioning and etc. Really, I mean, and I'll give you an example, the electronic music sector for 30 years really was self-sufficient. Everyone was quite happy not to have a government place, didn't want the government looking at what they were doing, wanted to just continue, have a party, glean the money from what they were doing and crack on. The pandemic created an environment where they needed the government, wanted a seat around the table. But I guarantee you most people would quite happily come away from that and not really be on the radar, because they'd feel better to come, be away from that sort of environment, although it was needed at the time. So I think for us at the moment, financial stability is really important. Being able to work towards a solid understanding of what the new financial modeling looks like, and then helping people get to a point where they can create that stability so that they can plan in terms of their financial future. The second part of the question that I think is really, really important is how do we actually develop or look at governmental support, or whether we talk about a levy, which I'm still somewhat in the balance. I think it's an important ethos. Probably my challenges is what the makeup and how it looks or how it works and how it's distributed is probably a big concern on our part. But there needs to be a consideration around dispensation or support for, and we have it over here where there are financial incentives for enterprise zones or etc., where if you're playing live music for more than 45 minutes, then there are certain dispensations in terms of your sort of financial modelling or contribution. So I think there are definitely models out there that I've seen that are workable, and I think that's definitely an avenue to look at. The levy is another one that's being considered. I'm not sure that the mandatory sort of position on it would be working, but I think the first port of call is we've got to gain that stability, because if we haven't got the stability, then we're just not on a sure footing, and that sure footing can change as we might get to a spring budget next year, and if we can't get the surety of where we are, then the business model changes again, and then we compromise ourselves because we've committed to planning towards a sort of fiscal position that's just necessarily not workable before we even get to what we need outside of that. So that's probably where I am with it. I know that was a bit of a laborious answer, but
no, Mike, it was spot on, and because he touched on it and actually clarified what I was trying to articulate not very well in the original question to Ali, is what Mike said, and what I was trying to say earlier is that in order to set up the ability to do, to promote live music and all of the cultural things, we need to have a clearly established foundation, don't we? So that if I as a business owner decide I want to enter the market and do something, that it's relatively easy, straightforward, and cost effective for me to do so, because regulation, as far as I've been able to see during my short time on the planet, is the absolute killer in terms of trying to get a business going.
Okay, so I'll try and answer this more quickly, right? What I would like to see, and this is not to do with the budget, or any budget, is I would like to see local authorities fully recognising the value of their evening and nighttime strategies, right? It's starting to happen in economy, sorry, starting to happen in London. There's some in Manchester. There's some isolated approaches. We're working in Wolverhampton at the moment. They're really keen on trying to see what they can do for their evening and nighttime economy, having been hollowed out and probably reliant on alcohol-led venues over the years. So the council's trying to think big about what it can do to support that industry and what their town and city centre looks like in the evening and at night, and what should be in there and who should be in there. So the one thing I would like to see is, every local authority creating firstly a nighttime strategy, right? So they're actually engaging with the trade, engaging with stakeholders in it to understand what the challenges are and what each of the stakeholders can do to deliver change, but also having a proper inward investment strategy around the evening and nighttime, right? And a culture, because, for me, often, we talk about inward investment and it's always about, whether it's biosciences or finance industry or Amazon warehouses, whatever wherever you are, it's always local context dependent. But I'd like to see a proper inward investment strategy for the evening and nighttime economy, the leisure and hospitality industry, into your town and city centres. That's the one thing I would like to see. If you said there's a silver bullet, there isn't a silver bullet, but I'd like to see that shift in perceptions from local authorities, that they want to get in evening and nighttime uses, that is an active part of their strategy. Mike
and Ali, I would fully concur with you. One of the things that I would say to you, and one of the challenges that we have, and I pick up, definitely something I've picked up from down here, is how do we create a data proposition that is going to evaluate where we are and highlight the opportunities, and also track the successes. Probably some of the biggest issues we've had with things like nighttime economy offices and nighttime economy advisors is there's some fantastic work on it, but what are the key performance indicators and what are the success factors? Once we understand how we establish those and the metrics around them, we can then start to decide what models look like that are successful and share best practice. So I think data is the fundamental pivotal position. We see the likes of Vibe Lab. We've got a great Data After Dark program that's being launched down here while we've been here. That Data After Dark program is the first time I've seen a very joined up approach between the likes of footfall, economics, cultural sort of shifts, categorization. I mean, for me, there is some broader work that needs to be looked at in terms of a global categorization of nighttime economy and how we start to track success factors across the world, not just the UK, so that we then start to benefit from everyone else's work and start to share best practice and initiatives that will make a difference. So for me, I'm completely with you. I just think that there's a bit of work that needs to be put into the data regimes that can be shared so that we can get the best out of it. And once we've got those, we can then start to build on focus areas, success factors, KPIs, tracking, and get to a point where we can, because once there is a proof of concept, it's an easier sell. You do Wolverhampton, it's successful. It starts to show growth. It starts to drive revenue into the evening and nighttime economy. The sell to Camden and everyone else becomes a lot easier. And that's the metrics around that are the bit that we need to really sort of start focusing on as well.
I think, I just sort of want to bring it back now because I'm well aware of the time. Yeah, breakfast, an extra croissant maybe needed for Ellie, and lunch will be beckoning, I'm sure, or dinner. I'm not sure what you call it in Australia. I don't know what the posh term is. But anyway.
Vegemite.
Vegemite, was it? But just want to sort of tie it back, bring it back to what can we do to take things forward? If we cannot rely on any government of any colour, what can we start to do as a sector to deal with the implications of this budget? we can actually take control of? Is there any sort of ideas that you think, right, this is what I would advise you to do?
I think there are going to be a lot of businesses out there looking at their position at the moment. The fact that they're in the middle of or embarking upon the golden quarter, which is the big opportunity of the year. They've got to then consider what they're going to do early parts of next year in terms of the sort of slower sort of trading period. I think they're going to be all working furiously, particularly the CFOs, on what their financial modelling will look like. And there'll be a lot of conversations around things like restructuring and things like that. Where in terms of the immediacy, how are they going to accommodate for this shift is probably some of the bigger conversations. How is it going to impact their workforce? How is it going to impact their productivity, their generation of revenue? What is going to be the impact on GP profitability, on product base? So there's a huge amount that needs to be considered, but that's going to be the first port of call without a doubt. If you're talking about completely disengaging from government and not relying on them, then it starts with evaluation of position. And then, I don't think you can get away from the fact that we've got to push on a local base to start to get a more understanding and valued approach to evening and nighttime economy and lend itself to the opportunities rather than the somewhat at times burdensome approaches that we see from some, not all, local authorities, which make it challenging.
Yeah, I suppose for me, it goes back to how do you value the evening and nighttime economy at a local level? And I think that's right. I think there are councils. I mean, I work with loads of local authorities, business improvement districts, operators in town and city centres all over the UK, globally, in fact. And you see a real range of supportive approaches, to really unsupportive approaches, to total neglect, right? And for me, those authorities and those places that are actually really supporting their evening and nighttime economy, and that is through business friendly licensing, having a joined up approach, talking to each other, talking up the value of it, talking down the naysayers. Those places really see it as a valuable part of their town and city centre and of their broader economy, right, and of the community. So for me, it's about having the data, as Mike talks about, so you actually understand what the value is, what's happening in it, because we've just see a lot of statistics about the decline of the evening and nighttime economy and the threats to grassroots music venues and the closing of nightclubs, etc. But what's happening locally? What can you do to support your evening and nighttime economy locally? Because as Mike said, the budget isn't great for the evening and nighttime economy. So what can you do locally? Can you improve transport? Can you reduce planning restrictions? Can you be more robust with residents moaning about noise from nightclubs and live music venues? There's lots of things that you can be doing at a local level by local politicians getting together with the other stakeholders in the community and saying, we really value this industry, right? That's probably the best strategy to support the evening and nighttime economy at the moment, because the government levers are just too big, really, to make any difference in the short term, for sure, right? So that's my approach, and get your councillors on board, articulate how much it's worth to your local economy, how many local people does it employ, what about young people, what's the opportunities there? There's a huge value in our industry, and it's really poorly articulated to decision makers locally, and that's the big step forward for me. And it doesn't matter what colour of politician you have delivering at the box, in the Houses of Parliament.
I think you're right. Now, I'll give you both a thing. I just want to. There seems to be, for me, looking at it, as a gammon from a slightly right of centre gammon, who's supposed to hate, all young people and noise, etc., etc. Having reached my age, I find there's a disconnect. I listen to people articulate superbly why we need this industry, but and it's right. And we hear it at the national level. Mike, you know what I think, you know, the work that you've done. And Ali, you know how long I've been a supporter of your views on how we move things forward. But yeah, how do we change the narrative to bridge that gap? Yeah, and literally sort of a minute or so, because I'm well aware of it at the time. You know, any thoughts?
I'm going to sum it up really sort of simply, and I agree with Ali. The time now is not for a national drive. It's time for a local drive. The national drive is not the in the current climate, with the current narrative and the responses that we've had from government, limited or effective to a point. It's not the time to really start to drive for bigger opportunities, whether it's policy or legislative. The big things in terms of local MPs, local councillors, there are opportunities. It takes time. It takes a lot of work in terms of looking at nighttime economy strategy. Also takes a lot of lobbying for them to understand the true value and opportunities that are within it. But I think there's some valued work there to be done, and it's definitely stuff that we're looking at with our ambassadors that we're working with as a group to start to drive that narrative on a local base. So completely agree with Ali. I think that local is now. National, I think, would have to come in possibly spring budget next year, when we'll start to understand exactly what the real true direction of travel in terms of this new government will be. Then we can start to sort of pick up some of those areas. But it's like I said earlier, in some respects, there are some positive messaging coming out in terms of policy, long-term reform, and these sort of things. The issue we have is the immediacy of the challenges that we face for the sector. So there was a very clear rhetoric in the budget that this is not about short-term fixes. This is about long-term reform. And I get that, and I completely understand it. The issue you have is you've got a proportion of the sector that can't wait that long. And that's where we struggle.
Ali?
I'll leave the last word with Mike. I can't sum it up.
Don't do that, Ali.
Look, it's an industry worth 136. That's my own figures. 36.5 billion. And it will be worth more this year, despite the challenges. When we remeasure it, it'll be worth even more. It's worth more as an industry than, you know, fashion, or, you know, even depending on how you structure it, the UK car industry, right? Yeah, and I once produced a list of all the industries. This was 10 years ago. I could do it again now. All the industries that we, wring our hands over when, the UK steel industry. You know, I'm from South Wales, and so we're very sensitive about the steel industry from where I'm from. But we wring our hands over these things, and rightly, right? But we don't wring our hands over, the impact of policy and of the restrictions on the evening and nighttime economy, despite it being one of our most successful national industries and global exports, right? And we should be wringing our hands over it, and we should have a much more, and Mike's obviously driving this, but we should have a much broader national discussion about why it's really important, in the same way as they do in, Germany and Berlin and parts of continental Europe, right? It is something that we should value literally and metaphorically, in a way that it has never been done properly. And it's changing, but will it change too slowly to save those businesses and those cultural institutions that Mike's talking about? I hope not.
I think the one thing I'll just add to that as well is the word that you use, and we both consistently use, is value. And we know full well that value position is not consistent with European countries and the way they approach. And that is a significant difference between the two, and definitely the experiences I've had. So, how do we determine or strengthen the position of value on a local and national base? There's a lot of work that's been done. The tide's turning. We're sat around the table. We're having robust conversations. Are we getting the policy decisions or the economic decisions? Not at the moment. Will we in the future? Absolutely. But it's a long road. Same way that the pandemic spent most of the time trying to teach politicians what nighttime economy was, and probably 6 months of my life I'm never going to get back, which was trying to explain what a nightclub was. So, you know, and if anyone says to me a nightclub is a place where there is a propensity for people to dance as the sort of predominant factor, which was surreal. Yeah, like you say. So value for me is the most prominent piece, and we've done a lot of work. Ali, you've been massively supportive in terms of the value proposition that we put across. It's done a lot for the industry. Has it solved the problems? No, because I think the agendas that are in front of the current government and previous government are way bigger than the proposition that we're representing, and the perceived value of the sector as a whole.
I think I'm going to have to wrap it up here because I'm well aware of the time, and it's interesting. We've covered quite a lot on the budget and various other things that should or shouldn't be done going forward. What I found interesting, that last bit, is about value. So there's that old saying, isn't it, about knowing the cost of everything and the value of nothing, and understanding the value of it. And I think that is the key thing. Our industry, the NTE, the NTE, the social economy, etc., we generate not only money, we generate joy. We bring happiness. It's something that we should be celebrating and should be encouraging people to, especially our politicians, to see the value of that. And in terms of its ability to create social cohesion, to break down barriers, because when you're out having a beer, you don't care, do you? Yeah, or whatever it is you enjoy doing, you're there in a shared experience. And I think that's what we bring. We bring joy. And Mike, Ali, on that joyful note, fully understanding the value that we bring to our nature, I want to say thank you very much for taking part. Peace out.